Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Merksmer, and I'm the current chair of PPIC. And on behalf of our board of directors, some of whom are here this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our program this morning featuring Governor Gavin Newsom. Governor, it's certainly a privilege to welcome you here today and to thank you for joining us. We very much appreciate your presence.
Thank you.
As many of you know, this event is part of PPIC's 2020 speaker series on California's future, which is sponsored and underwritten by the organizations listed on the screens to my right and left and on the back of your program. We're all very grateful for this support, and I think we should show it by giving our sponsors and underwriters a nice round of applause. This series is also funded by the PPIC Donor Circle and the PPIC Corporate Circle, groups of individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC. And we certainly hope that some of you or all of you would consider joining us as a sponsor or donor so that we can continue to make programs like today's possible and ensure that they remain free and open to the public in person and online. So before we begin, a couple of housekeeping items. PPIC is always trying to improve these events. Later today, you'll receive an email with a short survey, and we ask that you please take a few moments to let us know what you think of today's program. And finally, and most importantly, please, please, please silence your cell phones. So now I'm very pleased to introduce the moderator of today's conversation with Governor Newsom, PPIC President and CEO Mark Baldassare.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. I also want to acknowledge our other board members here today, Chet Hewitt, Marissa Chun, Karen Skelton, and our former board member, Donna Lucas, has joined us, so thank you all. Welcome to everybody. We're very fortunate to be talking to Governor Newsom today. I learned from Chief of Staff Ann O'Leary, who's here today, a week ago, about the governor's interest and availability.
Was it just a week ago?
A week ago.
We gave you time to prepare.
Yeah, and the fact that we wanted to have a focused conversation on energy, wildfires, climate change, and California's future, big topics. Yeah. So we move quickly to make this program a reality, and I'm very grateful to all of you for rearranging your schedules to be with us today. So you saw the format of the program. We're going to have a conversation, a focused conversation for the first part of the program. If you have a question for Governor Newsom, and it can be of a wide-ranging variety beyond our focus, please write it on the cards that are in the middle of your table. Hold it up for a member of our staff, and we'll collect them shortly for the second part of our program. So we're sort of following what the Senate impeachment trial is doing today in terms of those senators, with the cards.
The cards, yeah.
And just in terms of wide-ranging variety, I mean, I will see the cards when they come here, so, we'll hope they're substantive, but you might want to know who the governor thinks is going to win the Super Bowl on Sunday.
That's pretty obvious.
Or who the governor's supporting in the March presidential primary, or things like that.
Yeah.
So we'll leave that to later on. I probably won't get to those topics. Now it's a pleasure to welcome Governor Newsom. It's been a while since we've had a conversation like this.
Yeah.
I guess you had more time when you were lieutenant governor, and we got together more often.
Yeah,
but it's a delight to be here today. So let's talk about energy. Coincidentally, today is the one-year anniversary of PG&E's announcement to file for bankruptcy.
Yep.
And I want to run over some polling numbers with you because we did a survey last month.
Gosh.
Your approval rating.
I don't want to talk about those things.
Come on.
God bless.
All right. Come on. Your approval rating was at 51%.
Ah, Jesus.
And so that's gone up in the course of the last year.
All right, that's good.
Disapproval, 34%.
Yeah.
So now here's, and 29%. So here's now what this has to do with the current conversation. We asked a question about your handling of PG&E bankruptcy and utilities responsibilities for wildfire damages. Interestingly, on that, you got the same disapproval level, 34%, But in that case, 37% said that they approved, and 29% said that they didn't know enough to have an opinion.
Yeah.
So that's why we're here today.
Yeah.
We've heard and read quite a lot about what you don't want to happen. But what are the outcomes that you're actually seeking? And what's your vision for the future of California utilities?
Excellent. First of all, thank you all for showing up, especially, I didn't realize it was just a week ago. So clearly there's not much else going on in Sacramento that brought you here. And if you're like my staff, they said, boy, this is going to be a boring hour conversation. And so this is a tough topic. Let me back up a little bit. The reason this is not just about PG&E, or I'm hoping we don't just talk about PG&E or just talk about energy, is my broader anxiety about the world we're living in. A question that I talked often about on the campaign trail is a question we don't often ask and as a consequence don't answer. And that is, what world are we living in? What are the trend lines that define our world? And how can we as Californians take advantage of those trend lines? It's very contextual to obviously what's happening in Washington, D.C. It's contextual to the anxiety I think a lot of us feel about our fate and future. With an economy is doing as well as ours, you wonder why it is that people are so pessimistic, not as optimistic as some of the numbers may suggest. I talked a lot on the campaign trail about the 3 areas that I think will dominate our discourse over the next decade, both at a local, state, national, in some respects, an international level. We talked about the issues of IT and globalization, this notion that we're no longer connected, but hyper-connected, future of work, new work styles, new arrangements, very relevant to the topic at hand. We talked about the issues of debt and demographics, an aging and graying population, the issues of debt, the obligations funded and unfunded that we're making into the future, and the anxiety that that induces. But we also talked about the issue of energy and climate change, that the hots are getting hotter, the wets are getting wetter, the dries are getting drier. We're going from something old to something new in terms of the paradigm that we seek. And as a consequence, we've been really thinking over the course of the last year as an administration differently with that framework in mind, that we can no longer think about our low carbon green growth goals in isolation. We have to start thinking about our energy future and our transportation and our low carbon green growth future in a collaborative mindset. That's why you saw a few weeks ago, we announced that we want PERS and STIRS in the $700 billion portfolio to start thinking about the impacts of climate change from a market-based analysis. Thinking about not just sustainability from Mother Nature's prism, but sustainability from a market prism, from a return on investment prism. We talked about the utilization of all of our assets, not only our vehicle fleet and our purchasing strategies, our built infrastructure, but starting to integrate a mindset of intentionality. And that's what really brought us to this moment. PG&E's bankruptcy has turned out to be an extraordinary opportunity for this state. I never would have imagined that a year ago today. I saw it as a huge burden, one I did not necessarily anticipate spending as much time and energy on. It wasn't a big part of the focus of conversation over the last 3 years on the campaign trail, but it's turned out to be a godsend. And it's allowed us to ask questions and begin the process of answering questions that otherwise weren't front and center and weren't present. Fundamentally, our vision is not dissimilar to the vision that I imagine resides within all of you, in your imaginations, in the work that you do in your professional roles and capacity, and in terms of your expectation of where the puck is going and where the future is heading. But fundamentally, our framework is this with PG&E situationally, and then from a paradigm that integrates to the broader context that I'm professing. And that is, we need safe, reliable utility that's affordable and that is more flexible to meet the demands of the future. I believe in an IOU that is transformatively different than the one we currently have, particularly with PG&E. I have no interest in the existing management, the existing board. It has to be a completely reimagined, completely transformed company. Its culture has to change. Its mindset has to change. Its framework away from short-termism and situational thinking has to be replaced with a culture that focuses on you and me, not just shareholders. We have to begin to focus on meeting the demands that are required of a climate that is radically changing and an economy that's changing in real time. We have been working not only to address the bankruptcy as a short-term paradigm, but also lay out in detail a vision for a 21st century utility. As a consequence, we have worked with groups that include many of you here in this room, from Guggenheim, O'Melveny, and a gentleman by the name of Todd Filsinger, who is a turnaround expert. And the Filsinger group is out of Colorado, and they are experts in transformational thinking. And they have guided us down a path over the course of the last 6 or so months to lay out in prescriptive detail what that 21st century utility looks like. And as we process this conversation, I look forward to filling in the blanks to lay out the paradigm of thinking that we are advancing.
Good. So you've talked about a state takeover from time to time. And can you tell us about what your thinking is in terms of why that is part of the discussion?
Because if PG&E can't do it, we'll do it for them.
Okay.
Period, full stop. We're sick of the excuses, the delays. We're sick of the, let me say this respectfully. I mean, what is PG&E? It's a corpus. It's an entity. I've had a long history with PG&E going back to my days as a county supervisor, as a customer, fifth generation customer for my family. I've gone through 4 CEOs that I've been in personal contact with, the board of directors. I think there may be one holdover, if that. So the entity exists on paper only. But there's a culture there that transcends. And until that mindset radically reforms itself, then the state of California is poised to take it over. We created a framework and a plan last year called 1054 that laid out our expectation, that talked about a new company, a new board of directors that has a minimum of 50% Californians, that has a different skill matrix in terms of our focus, the requirement that there's a public safety division, a public safety advisory committee, a requirement that executive compensation and managerial compensation is tied to safety, not shareholder return. We have expectations in terms of investments, $40, $50 billion of investments in capital improvements over just the next 5 years. We said $5 billion of the incremental investment cannot come from you and me. There's no return on that increment of investment. We have wildfire mitigation plans that are now required of the NewCo. We have an expectation that the PUC creates their own advisory capacity that will aid and guide those mitigation plans. There's a 3-year revolving look forward to make sure the plan is forward thinking, not just short term. And that there has to be a good housekeeping seal of approval before any of the subsequent benefits of 1054 go into place. So we laid out that strategy this time, about 6 or months ago last year, and we're driving this bankruptcy process towards meeting those goals. But if they don't, if they cannot, we have not just rhetorically discussed a break the glass scenario of Plan B, but we have laid out in detailed terms what that would look like, and we're working with legislative leaders to advance it in real time in order to be prepared for June 30th of this year when they are forced to come out of bankruptcy in order to meet the provisions of 1054.
So let's go big picture again to some of the themes that you laid out when you were running for governor. You've traveled quite a lot around the state. I've been following the fact that you've had listening tours, you've met with people in the diverse regions, and you know that, like we know from our polling, that people are in very different circumstances in different parts of the region, and people in California today in very different circumstances economically as well. Our most recent poll on this topic, we found most people think the state's divided into haves and have-nots, and 45% of the people put themselves in the have-not category.
Yep.
So How does what you hear from people in the different communities around the state, different economic circumstances, affect what you think our energy future should look like?
Green cannot be more expensive for the vulnerable. Green can't mean more income inequality. Green can't mean less reliability. So the paradigm of thinking is directly focused on those issues, that disparity, this notion of a hybrid, bifurcated economy of haves and have-nots, the richest and the poorest state in this country. It's an issue, obviously, at scale for 40 million of us, but a big part of the national discourse and increasingly internationally. And so we have to think in those terms. Green must create jobs. Green must address the issue of socioeconomics, not just reliability and safety. And I respectfully don't think we've had that conversation enough. Many respects, not all, but in some respects, I don't think this. I know this as a beneficiary of some of the incentives. They've incentivized people with means, and many people without the means have subsidized some of those incentives. I'm an owner of an expensive car. I got a very generous rebate from the taxpayers of California. It's a perfect proof point and example. I have solar installation. I have backup storage. I was a beneficiary of a lot of support from the taxpayers and incentives that are borne across the board by many. So we have to be sensitive about that. And so I think of green in that paradigm. I think of it as an incredible economic opportunity. And by the way, the data just bears this out. With respect, I say, with respect. Fossil fuel jobs are outpaced today by green-collar jobs 5-to-1. Fossil fuel is now the alternative fuel in terms of the economic prism and where we're going as a state. 512,000 jobs in green tech, just about 89,000 in the fossil fuel industry, 5-to-1 margin. Those are old numbers. We're looking for new numbers. That's not to diminish, it's not to malign the fossil fuel industry. I'm very sensitive to that, particularly as someone who drove here today. But I recognize the future, and we want to embrace and we want to fast track that future. But it has to be an inclusive vision where all of us go together.
Well, and I'm glad to hear that because you and I know that there will be some dislocation. And the question is, where will how will we accommodate that dislocation? When I talk to people from the rural parts of California, they talk about their need to drive their truck. They talk about the kind of work that they have now and their ability to plug in a car and go where they want to go.
Yeah.
And so there will be, unless we're going to create more inequality, yeah, which I don't think that's your goal, there's going to be some dislocation.
Yeah, there will be, and so we have to mitigate that, but we can't just say that. We've got to do that. I was just meeting with Kern County leaders. A lot of them in the room were protesting me a week ago with signs saying, Newsom sucks Saudi oil. Not the most friendly way to prepare for a meeting, but I get their point. I get their point. You start putting some caps on fracking operations and try to address this transition in a more forthright and honest manner. We have some very aggressive and audacious low-carbon green growth goals, and in order to achieve them, climate policy will have an impact. Not just climate change. Climate policy will have an impact. And we need to meet that moment. The reason I met with him is I wanted to know that I own that. I'm the governor, I own that. I own a responsibility to address that dislocation in Kern County. By the way, that's also with private prisons in Kern County. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our policies, they may not have voted for me, but they matter and I care. You may have a president that doesn't see the world that way, but you have a governor that does. Kern County disproportionately is going to be impacted by this transition. Mm-hmm. So we got to do more than just say, well, you're all going to get a computer coding class online with a degree certificate at the end of the day, and somehow you should be fine. We've got to be more intentional. And by the way, we're trying to drive a strategy not dissimilar to the drive strategy that came organically out of Fresno region and drive that strategy organically into the area around Kern County, San Bernardino, et cetera. we have a responsibility to do that concurrently and in real time. So look, here's my thinking. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger did an amazing job at focusing on the what. Arnold sort of set the tone and tenor for our new strategies, our novel strategies on cap and trade. Jerry Brown, at scale, focused on why. No one, a master of explaining the existential nature of climate change and raising the alarm bells and anxiety. My responsibility, not exclusively, but disproportionately, our administration will be focused on the how, the application, the implementation. We moved from the 80s from a decoupling mindset, 90s and 2000s, into a focus on decarbonization. We're already at 34% on our RPS. Those are 2018 numbers. 55% for all of our electricity procured from non-carbon sources, if you include hydro and nuclear, which is extraordinary. But the next phase is decentralization. The next phase of a vision on energy procurement is addressing the issue of focusing in a very deliberative manner on localizing generation in a distributed way. Focusing not just on rooftop solar, but focusing on deep investments in storage. Segmenting and meshing our system. Beginning to integrate not just smart meters, but a smart grid. Yes, it's about hardening. Yes, it's about putting the kind of investments that are long overdue in making sure that we are undergrounding our wires, or more importantly, I think, starting to do this, and that's insulating our wires at a substantially lower cost, which is not often discussed in these conversations. But moreover, it's about a new paradigm, a new vision. And for PG&E, it's the toughest one, because they're operating in 48 counties, 16 million customers. They got 150,000 miles of line that needs somehow to be improved or at least upgraded in some way, shape, or form. The other IOUs, there's 3 of them, San Diego Gas and Electric, Edison, smaller, more modest considerations. The scale and scope for PG&E is profound, but they have to come out of this bankruptcy with a vision, not just limping into the future. And the resources, and this is where they're struggling right now, and we are in negotiations, the resources to invest in that future. If they can't do it, again, we have no choice but to do it for them, because the economic, human costs, not just the environmental degradation, is so profound and pronounced that we will be in peril compared to where we are today if we just sit back and let the markets take care of this for us.
Thank you. And I'm going to remember that list you gave us: clean, reliable, safe, and affordable. And I want to come back to the affordable later, but I feel like we should move on to another big topic that was on our list today, and that's wildfires. I'm sure that, like me, you watched what was going on in Australia. You were horrified for what was going on for the people who lived there, and thinking, is this going to be us next? So, and when last time we did...
Or feeling like we've lived through it.
Yes, okay.
Now they're experiencing it, yeah.
So, a record high 71% of Californians in our survey last year said that they're very concerned about wildfires that are more severe as an impact of climate change. It's January, but then it'll be spring and then it'll be summer. How ready is our state for the next round of wildfires? And have the catastrophic wildfires in Australia at all changed your thinking about what it means to have prevention, response, and recovery in California?
They haven't changed my thinking at all. They've just reinforced it. I don't know what more evidence we need after 2015, 17, and 18, 3 out of the last 4 years, most acute, extreme wildfire seasons we've ever had. I don't know what more evidence we needed after the Tubbs fire, losing 23 lives, 6,492 structures. Till 2018, we lost 18,804 structures and 85 lives at camp. Last year, we were remarkably fortunate. We had one of the best fire seasons we've had in recent memory in terms of severity and lives lost, number of structures damaged and number of lives lost. Some 732 structures for the entire year, and tragically, 3 lives lost. But we did remarkably well because we've never been more prepared. Governor Brown deserves an enormous amount of credit. The legislature driving that work we're doing last year, the extraordinary heroism, dedication of CAL FIRE, local law enforcement of all stripes, not just local firefighters, the incredible spirit of collaboration across this country and around the rest of the world. Australia came to the rescue in tubs and during the camp fires. I was up there, the Kincaid fire last year. We had some fires up near Shasta. Not one of our state resources had to be redeployed so we can focus on Kincaid because all the folks were coming in from Washington State and Oregon. The mutual aid system is second to none. Today we announced 34 out of the 35 high priority vegetation projects, vegetation management, the focus on forest management projects are 100% complete. I don't think many folks thought we'd get all those done. We got 34 out of 35 complete. We put unprecedented investments in new assets. We have 7 new C-130s that are being procured. We have new Black Hawk helicopters that will allow us nighttime capacity and suppression. There's old Hueys from 70s are being replaced with the new Black Hawk helicopters. We have put unprecedented amount of resources into investing in new technologies and capacity of satellites and LiDAR investments and predictive technologies. We have a company, forgive me, but they're impressive, TechnoSilva with a Y, that focus on weather modeling, fire modeling, predictive technology that allows us to look back and look forward. We didn't have these in the past. New weather monitoring, new cameras on site, unprecedented pre-positioning of assets. Ask the folks in Morago last year how important those pre-positioned assets were when they had a massive flare-up that could have been another Kincaid, God forbid another camp or Tubbs, that they were able to suppress because of the pre-positioned asset. And if we do what I hope we do this year, we're going to double down on those investments yet again, another $1 billion+ to invest in enhancing even further our capacity to suppress, predict, respond to a crisis. But again, what we need is not just a world-class response. We need a world-class utility that can complement that response and meet the needs that all of you expect. And that's why we are working concurrently to address those issues as one integrated plan.
Let's talk a bit more about prevention. And it's clear that fires are becoming more extreme and the fire season's getting longer. It's clear that the land use patterns that we've been following in California for decades are part of what makes wildfires hard to manage. Expansion of local communities in more fire-prone areas. The other part that makes it hard to manage is the fact that the federal government manages so much of the California's forest land. So how do you see us dealing with the twin challenges at the local and federal level?
Well, that's why we didn't wait around. I did an executive order, emergency declaration. It was controversial at the time to get those 35 high-profile projects done within a calendar year. Some of those projects were slated for 8, 10, 15 years in one case. We held ourselves accountable to meet those timelines, and we did substantially so. We are doing the job the federal government is no longer doing. A lot of those projects were also on federal land. 57% of the forested land in the state of California, 57, is federal. Trump administration's budgets, year over year, have been proposing cuts to forest management as he's tweeting out the moralization and the need to rake our forests more. And by the way, he's serious about the raking. He called me personally to double check on the raking. I thought it was a crank call. Can't make this up. But what you can make up is the science. You saw all the new data that just came out, said Bernard and all these guys were lying about forest management as a way to fast track more logging of our forests. So watch that space. Be very cynical about everything coming out of the White House on this. We don't need to be told to do. We're doing our job. We recognize we have more to do. Mr. President, we recognize that. By the way, half the money we invest in forest management and vegetation management, which has doubled and tripled in terms of prescribed burn and overall vegetation management. Half of it has gone onto federal property. By the way, state owns 3%. 57% is federal, the rest is in private hands. We're trying to do our best in that respect. But that's not in and of itself the solution. You're right, land use is part of that. It's interesting. You look at the Camp Fire, 51% of the homes in the Camp Fire survived that were built after 2008. Just 18% of the structures survived that were built prior because of new building codes. So hardening is a big part of this. Addressing the issues of sealing, not just skylights, and addressing materials on decks and roofs, but your garages. That's encouraging as it relates to the new built infrastructure. The problem is you got 11 million people now residing in these wildland urban interfaces. 4.5 million homes. One of them includes my family's home up in Dutch Flat, California, that was built, a community around the time of the gold rush. It's not a new land use strategy, one of the oldest land use strategies. And you don't want to tell everybody up there, well, you all have to move out. But a lot of them are feeling the pressure, including our household, because we're now on the FAIR plan. Because our insurance is so usuriously high, de facto was canceled. The only chance we now have is the FAIR plan. By the way, this is a very healthy thing for your governor to go through. And so we're cognizant of that. But we believe very strongly, look, I believe in localism. At the same time, I believe the state needs to assert itself a little bit more. We're having an SB 50 conversation that goes to the heart of that, and including on the issues of general plans and safety and these new planned communities in around the WUI. You want to get in that business, local planning commission, they better consider evacuation, fire safety, and consider these broader trend lines and narratives. And if they can't do that, the state may one day, sooner than later, be in a position where we're going to have to assert ourselves more forcefully.
And where are you on the SB 50 issue of
I'm here. They're debating it in the legislature.
You're here.
And we'll see,
Good.
as Donald Trump likes to say, what happens.
So you said you talked about things that were good for you to go through because you experienced it that are really hard things. So last year, many Californians, myself included, members of our staff, lived with the planned power outages as a wildfire prevention measure. By the way, we did some polling afterwards, and most people said that they approved of the governor's handling of the issue of wildfires and power shutoffs. But at the time, the head of PG&E said that we should expect planned power outages for the next decade, right? So how do you think about energy and public safety needs? How do you balance these things when you think about power and that there's another measure now by Senator Wiener called SB 378 dealing with this very issue. So please.
What happened last year is unacceptable, cannot happen again. It is not the new normal. I completely reject that.
So what is the new normal?
Well, the new normal is a completely different focus on reinvigorating this space and reprioritizing public safety in a different way. If you continue to do what you've done, you'll get what you got, which is a 10-year plan. That's hardly a plan. It's a status quo. You have to focus with intention. What's your 3-month plan? What's your 6, 9-month plan? How do you hold yourself accountable? Where are your safety improvements in the past? Now you got to reorganize, reprioritize them based upon real data, real analytics, real modeling. You can sharpen your focus on where you underground. You don't have to underground 150,000 miles. You can underground those high priority areas. You insulate in those other high priority areas. You start focusing with a different sense of acuity. Look, the good news is the PSPS experience of last year, we already have radically reorganized our framework of engagement, not just of the PUC, but PG&E in terms of mitigation. Worst case, we have a plan today, worst case, that would mitigate the duration of the plans, the PSPS experience, by 30% duration, or rather 50% duration, 30% in terms of the number of instances. That's worst case. But the PUC is going through a deep investigative dive and they'll be coming out with very prescriptive, detailed recommendations. There is a completely different collaborative now than we've had in the past in terms of our work at CAL FIRE to potentially pre-position assets in ways in concert with PG&E where they don't have to do a de-energization experience, but where we're already pre-positioned in the case of in worst case scenario, so that we can anticipate potential vulnerabilities. But we are looking to radically reform that space. I'm not here to overpromise, and I am here to remind you that PSPS has been used for some time in this state. If you're from Southern California, if you're from San Diego, you'll go, well, we're used to that, but it's surgical. It's not the kind of de-energization that we experienced in Northern California last year.
Can you
and
just
by the way,
describe what PSPS is for
it's
those?
power shutoff protocols. It's basically de-energization, turning off the damn lights.
Right.
Is the thing that drove everyone crazy last year. We felt like it was sort of apocalyptic. You got the fires, which are more modest than we've seen in the past, but it felt bigger because of the blackouts. By the way, PSPS puts people's lives at risk, puts people's property at risk. We had diesel generators that were backups that were flaring up, creating fires because of the power cutoffs. I was visiting hospitals where people weren't getting surgeries and had to be transported, seniors that didn't have the ability to get food or medicine. We were literally getting food and medicine for some seniors up near Napa County. It's unacceptable. That cannot happen again. By the way, that happened last year with 3 engineers in an algorithm in a room. They weren't focused in the field and looking at microclimates. They didn't have the meteorologists that they had hired. They weren't out there in real time. They just had this dumb system that they hadn't invested in, and that has to be completely recalibrated and reimagined. So we're working hard on that, and know that that's a stubborn thing. Let me just make this point, though. Politically, I recognize what's necessary may be impossible. But I also recognize, from a policy perspective, what is impossible has to become necessary. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's the dynamic we're in. And
yes.
I've got to meet expectation, at the same time deal with an incumbent reality of decades of mismanagement and malfeasance. Mm-hmm. And therein lies our challenge. So as we move into the new fire season, we want to set expectations, but no, the past is not predictive of the future.
So in a few minutes, we're going to go to the audience questions. So if you have any last questions, raise your hand and somebody will pick them up and bring them up. So you talked about a lot of the areas in which there are tensions with President Trump and the federal government right now on climate and energy, automobile efficiency, automobile fuel efficiency standards, fracking. We could go on and on. But I think what we would like to know,
5 times, yeah,
I think what we'd like to know, are there areas where California and the federal government are finding common ground today?
Well, quite literally today, we found common ground on the issue of 200 plus souls that were just brought from Wuhan through Alaska and Anchorage into Southern California and March Airport base. Working very collaboratively. I was talking to the head of the CDC last night, head of Health and Human Services. Secretary of Defense was very gracious to reach out. It's working collaboratively with our administration. That's a specific point.
What about on FEMA or the U.S. Forest Service or things that have to do with climate and energy?
The men and women at FEMA are rock stars, second to none. The clay layer and the bureaucracy, wonderful human beings, pros. Great relationships with our teams. Even the acting directors, they're mostly acting, are good human beings that are struggling with, assaults from above. Assaults on their senses, and I think on their conscience.
What about the delegation, which is obviously distracted by the impeachment, but also very divided politically? Can you talk to Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy about these things? Kevin and I have maintained a strong relationship, 2-way conversations. I've been in his district on multiple occasions trying to help with the homeless crisis. It's one of the biggest increases in homelessness is in that part of the state. You've got poverty levels in that part of the state among the highest in the nation. I'm committed to helping support those efforts. The earthquake that happened out there, I didn't see one Republican or Democrat in the room when I was meeting mayors and council members. Just human beings, care deeply about their communities. When it comes to emergency preparedness, emergency planning, I've tried to, ad nauseum,
made the point we got to rise above the politics. I'm committed to that. I'm not interested in that. I'm completely committed to that. I think the president is as well, until the politics become too compelling for him to no longer be in that position. So we've just got to create the right conditions where politics can't trump good policy. And in this respect, so far, we've been able to do that.
So recently, a group of legislators have proposed the California Green New Deal, and with the goals of cutting greenhouse gas emissions and reducing homelessness. On what issues do you expect to work with the legislature this year to advance some of your vision on climate and energy and wildfires and utilities in California's future?
In every respect, I'm committed to that. Look,
are there anything in particular?
Specifically, we have a climate resiliency package that we put forward.
Let's talk about that.
I have $1 billion over the next 4 or 5 years that we want to invest in new technologies and address the issue of some of the areas of vulnerability and new investments in the private sector for technologies that haven't proven themselves, that we could be a catalyst and create a catalyst fund for those investments so we can advance our low carbon goals. Remember what they are: 100% renewables by 2045, 5 million electric vehicles by 2030, 40% reduction in our greenhouse gas goals below 1990 levels by 2030. If you followed that, God bless you. The point is, the goals are prescriptive, the application implementation is not. And so any part of a Green New Deal, which is aspirational, I'm all in terms of the pragmatic steps we need to take together. Electricity is the architecture for transforming transportation. Transportation sector was a sector we saw an increase in greenhouse gases last year. It's 41% of all of our greenhouse gas emissions. We've got to electrify that fleet. That's an opportunity to advance our goals. That Catalyst Fund will help support those goals. We also have a resiliency bond we're working with the legislature on. We proposed $3.75 billion. They want to see it a little bit higher. $500 million of that 4.75 is for home hardening and other hardening efforts to address some of our resiliency. There are other aspects that the legislature looks to advance. So those are just specific areas that we're already working very collaborative on. And I hope certainly on the deeper issue of recycling, which I may bore you on that. It's not tangential, it's profoundly exciting. And if you're not excited about recycling, you're not paying attention.
It's true.
That I'm looking forward to.
It's true. We're going to start the audience question. We've got some great audience questions. The one that I thought we would start with is somebody wants to know, Governor, any tips on having a balanced life?
Oh, Jesus.
The juggling.
Where's my wife? Is in the back. There
Okay.
she is. Yeah.
The juggling act we all do, but much more stress for you?
No one wants to hear.
You can raise your hand.
No one can. I know I joked that. My wife
wanna
must
go to
have
the next
submitted that.
question?
Is that submitted by email? We had a tough. I didn't even shave this morning. We had a tough morning, and it's not it. My daughter, she's in the hiding in the house, not going to school mode, and that's been about a week, and so I was all me this morning. But climate's easy, energy's easy, parenting that's tough. Yeah.
There you go. Good. Somebody else had a question about what are you going to do about the unaffordable cost of housing? Will you start a program for people to buy houses?
Well, we did. Last year we put $1.75 billion, new tax credit program up to $500 million, new loan program up to $500 million. We provided more infill grants for cities and counties to address infrastructure needs. I provided money to allow cities and counties that don't have the resources to do more work on their general plans, on their housing elements. Unprecedented package. We also signed over 13 bills specifically targeting the issue of housing and homelessness, time value of money, addressing supportive housing, and addressing the issues of 100% affordable housing, some CEQA reforms as relates to siting shelters, new strategies for ADUs. A lot of work was done this last year. Seems to me most folks, though, are focusing this SB 50 as a proxy for whether or not you got anything done. That's a real-time conversation. We need to do more on production. We also focused on prevention, unprecedented commitment. This state, first state, do this ever to have a just cause eviction requirement at a statewide level. No one thought we could do that. We did that. And to have an anti-rent gouging protection so people that are vulnerable to double-digit rent increases no longer will feel those pressures starting January of this year. We are committed to doubling down on our production. It's a stubborn issue. It's taken decades to to put ourselves in this position. Our critics are right. Affordability is the issue that defines more other issues in this state, and the issues of utilities and energy also tie to the anxiety around affordability. And that's why I say, when we talk about going green, it has to be green growth that's inclusive, and that has to be a mindset that's more front and center in our conversation.
Somebody else asked, do you support SB 50? I already asked that. I don't think we're going to go there again.
We will get something big done on
okay.
production this year.
So somebody else wanted to know what you're going to do about fire insurance. They just lost their fire insurance.
Well, I see Rex Frazier here. We're going to work with Rex and my friends in the insurance. Look, it's a huge issue. We have an enormous amount of work to do. It's not just an issue for the insurance industry. It's an issue for every single person in this room. You can't get insurance, your property values drop. Your property values drop, tax revenue drops. Tax revenue drops, we don't have the ability to invest in our growth engines, which are our kids and our future K through 12 education system. It's profoundly important from an economic paradigm perspective. It's profoundly important from a budgeting perspective. We all recognize our need and responsibility to do more. We weren't able to do things that I was hoping we could do last year. I'm hoping we get a lot of those done this year. And I bring out Rex only because he's been a good actor in all this, and I'm looking forward to working with him and others to get something big done this year.
Okay, what are your plans for expanding zero-emission transportation in California?
Radical refocus on electrifying our transportation fleet. Again, utilities, transportation, that linkage. Look, the utility of the future includes my electric car. I see our vehicle fleets as energy suppliers. I see that electric vehicle that comes to your house, and I say comes to your house because you used your mobile app to whistle it up, like an old Western whistling an old horse. And it comes to your home, and it starts generating electricity for your appliances. That's not a future that's 100 years away. It's not, I even argue, 10 years away. That presents itself tomorrow. That's what PG&E needs to be focused. That's what I mean by vision. And that is only realistic if we radically transform our transportation sector, and it is being radically transformed. Not only as it relates to mobility being transformed by autonomy, artificial intelligence, and big data, but also in terms of our opportunities to deeply commit to the electrification of our fleet. California is leading the nation. America used to lead the world. Now there are 14 countries that are already poised to make it illegal to procure or purchase a combustion engine. Already 14. And by the way, that's a few weeks old. They're probably 15 or 16 now. From China, India, Israel, Ireland, all moving in that direction. We will lead in this space, and I cannot wait to see that future manifest in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you. Here's another question. Well, there are several questions on homelessness, but I'll choose this one because it's kind of personal. As PPIC noted, homelessness is the top priority. My 15-year-old is writing a paper on it for a government class. Boy, that's a good parent here to help ask a question, you know. So she would like to know if communities build shelters for homeless people, would they be required to get off the streets? Why or why not? But let's more broadly talk about homelessness. We shouldn't leave here today without saying something.
Well, it's the ultimate manifestation of our failure as a society. We talk about poverty. We talk about, two different worlds that we're living in the same state. The ultimate manifestation of our failure, the poor souls out on the streets and sidewalks. 108,000 in our last point in time count, unsheltered. Disproportionate number, self-medicating, drug or alcohol addictions with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, paranoia. It's a national disgrace. It's a disgrace that it's happened to be so normalized. A decade ago, about 120,000 people out in the streets and sort of accepted that. Now it's 151,000, everyone's saying it's unconscionable. Where the hell were we a decade ago? The state of California has had no real homeless plans. It's had no homeless plan. It's not been a focus and frame. I'm a former county mayor. I know this for a fact. It's been the responsibility of cities and counties. That can no longer be the case. The biggest paradigm shift on this started this time last year when we began the process to request unprecedented amount of money of emergency aid for cities and counties. That money is literally going out in the streets as we speak. This month and next month, $650 million emergency grants are going out. I'm requesting $750 million of additional resources to the legislature, but I want to put it into a fund where we can cap administrative costs and we could direct investments in a way where they don't get lost within local bureaucracy. Real transparency, now real accountability. We've never been more focused than we are, but it's a flywheel. This will not happen overnight, but know that our commitment to housing first, shelters respectfully solve sleep, I would tell that young man. Housing and supportive services solve homelessness. We will not deviate from our housing first model until they kick me out and replace them with a more persuasive person. We are not just going to focus on the temporary, but nonetheless, these trailers we put out under emergency order and the work we're doing to get these temporary facilities up is also a requirement to stabilize and triage as we look to the medium and long term. Final point on this, forgive me.
No.
My state of the state, a little preview.
When is it going to be, by the way?
It's a good question. This is all getting in the way, all this stuff.
Sorry. Keep going.
We're committed to radically reimagining our behavioral health system, not mental health system, our behavioral health system. It's been decades and decades in the making, and respectfully, it's not the prism of the right or the left that got us here, but we're here. And we are supporting an effort, getting the legislature to, we hope, embrace enthusiastically what we refer to as CalAIM, which is a complete refocus on payment strategies to incentivize the integration of brain health and physical health in a way that we think also will do justice to this deeper issue of homelessness, but more broadly address your anxiety, as many of you, I imagine, have family or friends that are struggling with mental health.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Somebody's going to have a really good comments for a paper to bring home to their 15-year-old. That's terrific. We could talk a lot more about that, but we haven't talked about water today, and there's a question here about, it says, you appear to have endorsed Governor Brown's approach to water. Can I finish it?
I don't know about that.
And then relying on tunnels rather than reducing dependence on the Delta, is there a better way? So
well,
let's talk about your vision on water.
Yeah, that question is misleading because I put out a water portfolio plan, first plan we put out in some time, that laid out in very prescriptive terms a counter narrative to that question that focuses beyond just the issues of conveyance to groundwater replenishment, to recycling, storage, in addition to the critical issues of conveyance. But one thing I'm not going to do, and I know this frustrates probably 2/3 of you, I'm not interested in reinforcing the arguments of the past. I'm just not. You know, people call, I love reading all about, hey, he's naive, he's being misled. You know, good. You know, because it means we're doing something a little different. Roger Bannister said this. He said, I didn't know what I didn't know. Roger Bannister is the guy who broke the 4-minute mile. Because if he knew that he couldn't break it, he probably wouldn't have broken it. But he didn't know what he didn't know. It's the beginner's mind. I like the beginner's mind. I've been at this 20 years, ran one of the largest water systems in the country, happens to be a 167-mile gravity-fed system coming from Hetchy that runs throughout the Bay Area as mayor of San Francisco. And I've been a student of this, but I don't know what I don't know. You want to go into lawsuits, you want to screw this person, screw that person, spend 7 years getting nothing done, I am the wrong person in this job. That's so easy. That's so predictable. I'm not going to do that. I care deeply about the folks in San Joaquin. It's not just big ag. There are real human beings whose lives are being torn asunder because of the scarcity of water. I'm not interested. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not us versus them. You think I don't love the environment? Geez, it's been the cause of my life. One of the most thrilling things just experienced a couple weeks ago with my son were all those damn salmon that had their last rites. And we're explaining life in a different way with all those vultures that didn't even move, that were 3 feet away from us because their bellies were so damn full. What a magnificent sight. And I talked about what the Native Americans would have been able to do. They've been able to walk across that stream 50 years. I want to bring that back. But You're not bringing that back by getting in 7 years of lawsuits where nothing gets done. That's why I'm pursuing voluntary agreements. Forgive me, but I'm going to be stubborn. That's why I think we could do more with flexibility, working together. I'm an urban guy that cares about the state of California. And I care about every part of the state of California. And when we talk about fallowing land, that is real people, real lives. And I have to look them in the eyes. It may be an intellectual thing for some that are sitting on the coast, with all due respect, reading the newspaper and talking about the aggregate and saying, well, our economy's doing fine. But what about that poor damn mother that literally can't take care of that kid because they can't get that work anymore? You don't do that to someone. You don't destroy a community that was built over hundreds of years. You've got to be accountable. And so why I'm a little more intense about this is I want everyone to calm down. And I want, just give us a chance. I'm going to have your back. You think, I don't need to be told you need to be tough against the Trump administration, not tussle. Give me a break. I know that. But give us a chance. And if you're right, you can sit there and jump up and down and say, I told you so. Enjoy that. It might make you feel good. But give my team a chance. I have one of the best EPA directors we've ever had, is one of the great champions on the environment. I have one of the best water Wade Crowfoot and the team he's assembled. These are real great human beings that care deeply about the environment, and they think it's right to reach out to ag and work with these guys. So it's just like energy. The world is changing. We have to change with it. Flexibility, putting the old binaries aside, getting off our high horse, recognizing that we need each other. There's no leak on your side of our boat. We rise and fall together. And so I'm glad someone thought that too. So okay. I'm just saying, all these things, I love the word water, energy, transportation, climate, the markets, integration of thinking, reimagine old paradigms, committing to a common cause. This is the greatest state God's ever conceived. 119 months of consecutive net job growth. 3.8% average GDP growth over the last 5 years, running record surpluses, record reserves. You got a government, federal government's running record deficits, no reserves. I watch Fox News and I'm sick and tired of the paradigm that it's just needles and feces and homelessness and unaffordability. You know what? Those are vulnerabilities. Let's own those vulnerabilities, but let's lean into them. And let's be more capable of acknowledging our weaknesses, but also celebrating our strengths. So anyway, homelessness, housing, education. Don't you go moving to Tennessee, young man. Don't you go leaving this damn state. We're going to get through this. We're going to deal with the blackouts. And PG&E, that company no longer exists. There's going to be a new company, or the state of California takes it over, and that new company is going to be transformed. And in 5 or 10 years, I think that IOU potentially could make every one of us proud and could be a model for the rest of the nation if we do our job.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today.
I filibustered my last name. Thank you all. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Governor Newsom, for finding the time to do this today. I really enjoyed it. It's been too long since we've had a chance to talk, and we covered a lot of territory. We had a lot of good questions from the audience, too. I also want to thank Steve Merksimer for being part of this program. I want to thank all of our sponsors for the support, and I also want to thank our audience and our event team and the caterers for coming together so quickly on this. On February 3rd, in just a few days, we will have a program on the 2020 census here, and I hope you'll take part and be coming to that program as well. Have a good afternoon. Thank you very much.